But if we're not careful in the church, if we don't know that isolation is the issue around disability with which we should be focused on, then we can tend to look like the world, and the church can become a place that is seeking to normalize or eliminate, both of which are I'm taking as terrible options. That is not what we are to be doing. So within the church, this might look like shushing any loud kids, making sure that all the kids behave the same way. That's normalizing, all right? Or we may see every disability as an opportunity to heal or to pray or, get these people healed, which is eliminating disability. Like, and in Scripture, like, absolutely, we see that things can be healed, right? We see that in Scripture. Now, could go a myriad of 1,000 different ways in what you believe and how you believe. But in Scripture, we see that Jesus healed people, right? And it was a good thing. I would just say that normally he didn't like surprise people with that. He actually got to know them. He talked to them. He asked them, do you want to be healed? Oftentimes, not all the time. We can parse them all out. We could talk about healing. But we got to be careful in the church that we don't just see disability as something that needs to be healed, right? I mean, Jesus didn't heal every person with disability that he encountered. Okay, could have, didn't. Figure that out for yourself. So in 16 years of being deeply immersed in the lives of those with disability and their families, I believe the issue that we confront is isolation. That disability is the human experience. But if we go to Genesis, God is just making stuff, right? He's just whipping it out. He's separating the night from the day, and he's making land and water, and he's making the animals. And over and over and over and over again, we see him look at what he's made and say, it is good. He looked at it is good. It is good. It is good. It is over and over and over again. There's one thing that is not good in that account. Okay? And if we look at it, it's Genesis 2:18. It was not good for man to be alone. Okay? And that's the creation of Eve. Here comes Eve. Okay? That's not just about marriage, though. Okay? It was not good for man to be alone. We are meant to live in community alongside each other. And the problem within disability space is not the impairment, but the social effects. So we talked kind of about the social model of disability versus the medical model of disability. And in 99 Balloons, we believe that the issue is isolation, right? That this is the church's game, right? That we're not going to churches and say, you know what, churches, man, you really need to be providing this level of service to people with disability or community. Great, some churches do that. We work with churches who do all kinds of unbelievable things. But the church is not supposed to be a service provider in any way, shape, or form. And normally they'll really suck at it. Okay, I'll be honest. Not a real struggle for me. But like respite is kind of like, man, that's about as much as I would really train the church at large to do. Because it's not really their game, right? Like you start expecting some sort of church to be some service provider or something. I think it starts to get a little fuzzy, right? It starts to get a little weird. What we're saying that churches should do is that churches should be the place where people with disability experience being known and experience being in relationships. Again, I would say we're not really talking about disability at this point. We're talking about the human experience. Disability and you, one human experience, okay? And when we look at it, they're in the garden, and God, this is before the fall. Your free token word is prelapsarian, okay? Before the fall. Before the fall, God says, hey man, you can eat it all, except for don't touch that one. Don't eat that, okay? So God places on man and woman a limit. God determines a boundary that he says, don't cross it, okay? So before, humans, all right, this is our introduction to limitations. Do not eat, do not touch. What must have to Adam and Eve seemed like an arbitrary, odd rule of God, right? Don't do that one. Okay, I mean, what's special about that one? Okay, but God created all men and women to live within determined limits. We see here our introduction to limits, and it is supposed to be, not because of the fall, it is supposed to be what the human experience was created to be, limited by God, who determines the limits placed upon the human experience. Verse 4, we see, because if you do cross the boundary that I've set, what's going to happen? You're going to die. Okay? Bad news. Adam and Eve probably can't even quite conceive of what that means at this moment. They've never seen anything die. Okay? But he says, if you do the thing I've asked you not to do, you will die. Your life will be limited. So we see here an introduction to suffering. And we see later the serpent come and say, you will not surely die. Right? You will not surely die. That is this temptation or this lie of the serpent that suffering is avoidable. You will not surely die. Satan says you can be like God. You can avoid suffering. You can overcome any limitation placed upon you. Okay? But we see here that all human life now includes suffering. This is after the fall. Because looking ahead in the story, they do cross the boundary. And now they are going to die, right? And so that's post-lapsarian for you big wordsy folks, okay? Pre-lapsarian, before fall, post-lapsarian now. So we have the fall, and now all human life now includes suffering, okay? Verse 7, we have our introduction to limits. We have our introduction to suffering. Verse 7, we have an introduction to vulnerability and shame. Verse 7 says, then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. So they went and sewed fig leaves together in order that they may hide their vulnerability. Okay? So we see a vulnerability to suffering already, but here we're talking about a vulnerability occurring upon being seen and judged in our fallenness by others. Being seen as broken, fallen, sinful by other people. That's the vulnerability that we're talking about. That's why they're hiding parts and pieces. I don't want to be seen in my vulnerability. So we have this introduction to vulnerability and shame, and then we have their reactions to this reality. Their reactions to this reality are they begin hiding, all right? They hide themselves. They physically isolate themselves, and then they're going to try to go be alone. From what? From God. They're now isolating from God, right? We start to see them hide. We start to see them hide themselves, covering over themselves, this introduction to hiding. So we see that human life is vulnerable. Vulnerable before the eyes of others, vulnerable before the eyes of God. The response to being confronted with their fallenness is a sense of fear. And then this concept of that it ends on of who told you that you were naked becomes this desire to control others' perceptions. All right? So they have this desire to shape the perception that others have of them. To not be what they are. To listen, they are listening to the perspective of others, put efforts towards changing the viewpoint of others and influencing how they are perceived. Who told you that you were naked? That is, who outside of yourself, God says, who outside of yourself defined you in a different way than I defined you? Shame is that experience of being seen in our vulnerability by the other. This is the human experience, okay? We have the introduction to limits, which came before the fall. The human experience of life as it was meant to be includes limits. And then we have bad news. They ate it, okay? So we have introduction to suffering. Not the way it was supposed to be, but the way it's going to be. All right? All of this has nothing to do with disability. Okay? This is true of all of us. But why we are particularly camping out here in Genesis and thinking deeply about this is that I believe our encounters with profoundly disabled friends of ours, most acutely our encounters with those with profound intellectual disabilities, force us to face these truths about ourselves that we build our entire lives navigating around facing. We come face to face with obvious limitations. We come face to face with obvious suffering of some sort. Though many of our friends with disability don't suffer, we project it onto them. And we come into a vulnerability. And so in our encounters with disability, it forces us to face limitations that have been placed upon all of us, in which no effort we perceive as bad. We think limitations are bad. Ultimately, the reality of our own death, our lack of ability to avoid suffering. The disability forces us to face limitations. It forces us to face suffering. It forces us to often face shame, how we are perceived in our weaknesses and vulnerability, how we look upon others, and we know we do, and their weaknesses and vulnerability. We can seek often to eliminate or normalize those with disability for all kinds of reasons, but chief of them, that we don't want to face the reality of being human, that I am broken and in need, that I am vulnerable to suffering, even death, that I lack control over events in my life and am unable to protect myself or those around me. So it's just easier to not face this reality, whatever that means.